He left her for a younger model and collapsed when the black woman he rejected became a billionaire CEO overnight. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Elias was a man who measured success in aesthetics. He built his life and career on a foundation of curated beauty, believing that a discerning eye for art was a direct reflection of a discerning eye for life itself. His art gallery, The Gilded Frame, was a testament to this philosophy. It was a space of minimalist elegance, where stark white walls and polished concrete floors created a sanctuary for the vibrant, often challenging, works of the contemporary artists he championed. Elias, in his tailored suits and carefully disheveled hair, was the master of this domain, gliding through a world of sparkling wine, hushed conversations, and a perpetual sense of his own importance. But his keen eye, he felt, extended beyond canvases and sculptures. It defined his personal life, too. He believed a man of his stature and taste required a partner who was not only intelligent, but also a seamless part of the beautiful life he had so meticulously constructed. And for 10 years, that partner had been Amara. He had met Amara in college, a time when his ambition was a raw, unrefined thing and her brilliance was a force of nature. She was a political science major with a mind like a steel trap and a laugh that could make you forget every worry in the world. They were an unlikely pair, the aspiring art dealer and the future policy wonk. But their connection had been electric. She had been his rock, his confidant, and his fiercest supporter. While he was dreaming of future exhibits, she was working 2 part-time jobs to help pay their rent and quietly building the foundation for her own dreams. She had edited his gallery proposals, critiqued his business plans, and celebrated every small victory with a genuine joy that he, in his self-absorption, had come to see as simply his due. Over the past decade, as his gallery grew from a tiny storefront into a respected institution, Amara had been a constant presence. She had sacrificed her own career progression to support his, taking on a less demanding job so she could be there for him, managing the gallery's finances in the early years and acting as his unofficial social secretary. She was an anchor in the sometimes chaotic art world, a steadying presence that allowed him to be the charming, visionary artist he saw himself as. Lately, though, the anchor had begun to feel like a weight. The vibrant spark he once saw in Amara had, in his eyes, faded into a comfortable but predictable routine. Her conversations, once filled with passionate debates about global politics and social justice, now revolved around mundane topics like their shared grocery list, the leaky faucet, or their plans for a quiet night in. She was still brilliant, still kind, but to Elias, she had become dull. The woman he once found exhilarating now felt like a part of his furniture, a comfortable but uninspiring fixture in the background of his meticulously designed life. He yearned for the thrill of the new, the validation of a younger woman on his arm, a testament to his own enduring vitality. He saw other men at his social functions with girlfriends half their age and felt a pang of envy, a fear that he was being left behind, that his own gilded frame was beginning to tarnish. His solution came in the form of Serena. She was a 23-year-old aspiring model who had been hired to pose for one of his artists. Serena was the antithesis of everything Amara had become in his mind. She was effortlessly cool, with a cascade of blonde hair, a flawless social media presence, and a complete lack of ambition that he initially found charming. She didn't talk about politics or global issues. She talked about fashion trends, tropical vacations, and the latest celebrity gossip. Her world was a kaleidoscope of selfies and fleeting moments, and Elias, with his aging sensibilities, found himself completely captivated. She embodied everything he thought he was missing: youth, a carefree spirit, and the kind of surface-level excitement that made him feel alive again. In her presence, he felt younger, more relevant, more desirable. He told himself that this wasn't about selfishness, it was about growth and change. He was evolving, and Amara, in his mind, was not. He had simply outgrown her, like a favorite jacket that no longer fit. This self-serving narrative allowed him to ignore the quiet voice of his conscience and prepare for the ultimate betrayal. He convinced himself that he wasn't leaving Amara. He was simply moving on to a life that better reflected the man he believed himself to be. The breakup was not a conversation so much as it was a declaration. Elias had rehearsed his lines, framing his callous decision as a profound, almost philosophical act of self-discovery. He'd invited Amara to their favorite Italian restaurant, a place filled with a decade's worth of memories, first dates, anniversary dinners, and quiet celebrations of both small and large victories. The familiarity of the setting, he thought, would soften the blow. He was wrong. He began with a preamble of flowery, meaningless compliments, praising her intelligence and kindness, as if he were presenting a eulogy for their love while it was still breathing. Amara, sensing the shift in his demeanor, simply listened, her posture straight and her gaze steady. There was a quiet dignity about her that he found irritating. He had expected tears, or at least an argument, something that would allow him to play the role of the reluctant villain. Amara, he began, his voice dropping to a theatrical murmur, we've grown apart. I've changed. I need more. The words tasted bitter in his mouth, a lie he was selling to himself as much as he was to her. He continued, spiraling into a monologue about his need for new experiences and creative stimulation, a thinly veiled justification for his boredom. Then, he delivered the final, crushing blow. You deserve someone who can keep up with you, Amara, he said, twisting the truth into a weapon. But that's not me anymore. He made it clear that he was leaving for Serena, highlighting her youth and the potential she had, a word that rang with cruel irony given Amara's own, long-ignored potential. She just gets it, he said, as if it were some profound, unspoken truth rather than a shared affinity for vapid entertainment. She understands the art world in a way you never really did. This was a particularly sharp jab, considering Amara had spent countless hours with him, helping him build his career from the ground up, learning the nuances of an industry she had never intended to be a part of. For a long moment, Amara said nothing. She simply looked at him, and in her eyes, Elias saw not sadness or anger, but a profound disappointment that was far more painful than any rage could have been. It was the look of someone watching a person they once admired reveal themselves to be a fraud. Her silent, steady gaze stripped away his rehearsed justifications and left him feeling exposed and small. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost detached. So, this is it, she said, her words devoid of emotion. After 10 years. Amara, please, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand, a gesture she politely but firmly withdrew. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You've already made it as hard as it can be, she replied, her voice still quiet, but with an undercurrent of steel. She stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table to cover her half of the untouched drinks, and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. The days that followed were a blur of cold, efficient separation. She didn't argue or cry. She just started packing her bags, a single-minded determination in her movements. He tried to feign sadness, to make small talk, but she responded only in monosyllabic answers. He watched her pack, noting that she didn't take any of the gifts he had given her over the years, the expensive jewelry, the designer clothes. She packed only her books, her files, and a few cherished items from her past. The morning she left, she carried a single small box. Elias watched her from the window as she loaded it into the back of a taxi. He thought he saw a single tear fall down her cheek, but he couldn't be sure. As the cab pulled away, she didn't look back. She carried with her not only that small box, but also the fierce, simmering beginnings of a plan. Elias, standing alone in their now empty apartment, felt a fleeting moment of regret, a brief pang of loss. But then, he remembered Serena and the promise of a new beginning. And the feeling vanished, replaced by the self-satisfaction of a man who believed he had made the right choice. He was oblivious to the fact that he hadn't just rejected a woman. He had rejected a future, one he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The quiet, dignified woman who had just walked out of his life was about to become a force of nature, and he had no idea what storm was coming. The apartment was now a quiet, hollow echo of the life Amara and Elias had once shared. It felt less like a home and more like a crime scene, each empty space and bare wall a reminder of what had been lost. But in the silence, Amara found a strange kind of peace. The initial shock and pain had worn off, replaced by a cold, fierce resolve that had taken root deep within her. The tears she had held back were a reservoir of fuel, and the memory of Elias's dismissive gaze was a relentless goad. For 10 years, she had been a supporting character in his story. Now, she was ready to write her own. She moved into a small, sun-filled apartment across town, a place that felt refreshingly hers. The walls were a blank canvas, not an extension of Elias's aesthetic. She bought a second-hand desk, a comfortable chair, and a powerful laptop. This was her war room, her laboratory, the birthplace of her revenge. But it wasn't a revenge born of malice. It was a revenge of success, a burning need to prove to herself, not just to him, that her worth was not defined by his validation. She had spent a decade building his dream alongside her own, and now, it was time to focus solely on hers. The project was called Aura, a concept she had been developing in secret for years, stealing moments after Elias had gone to sleep or during long weekends when he was at art openings. It was an AI-powered platform designed to revolutionize the art world, a direct response to the very system Elias's gallery perpetuated. Aura would use machine learning to connect independent artists directly with buyers and galleries, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers, the snobbish, elitist middlemen who decided who was worthy. It was a bold, ambitious project, a digital disruption of an industry that prided itself on tradition and exclusivity. She poured every ounce of her energy into the project. Her days were a blur of code, design, and market analysis. Her small apartment became a fortress of productivity. The hours blurred into days, the days into weeks. She survived on a diet of strong coffee, instant noodles, and the occasional takeout. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. The only thing that mattered was building Aura. The memory of Elias's face as he explained his decision, the condescending tone, the casual cruelty of his words, played on a loop in her mind, a constant, painful reminder of what she was fighting for. She recruited a small, hand-picked team of equally brilliant and driven individuals, 2 young software engineers who believed in her vision, and a user experience designer who understood the need for a platform that was not only powerful but also intuitive. They worked remotely, communicating through endless video calls and late-night messages, a digital family united by a shared passion and a fierce belief in Amar's leadership. She was no longer the quiet partner in the background. She was the CEO, the visionary, the leader. The first prototype of Aura was a beautiful, functional thing. It was a clean interface that allowed artists to upload high-resolution images of their work, complete with metadata and artist statements. The AI algorithm would then analyze the art, identifying styles, themes, and potential market appeal, and then match the artist with a curated list of potential buyers, galleries, and art critics who were actively looking for similar work. The system was designed to be fair, transparent, and, most importantly, accessible. The beta launch was a small, quiet affair. She and her team huddled around a screen, their hearts pounding in unison as they pressed the Go Live button. The platform was a triumph of design and engineering. The initial response from the small group of artists and buyers they had invited was overwhelmingly positive. The feedback was a steady stream of praise, and the early success stories, a street artist in Berlin getting a gallery show in New York, a painter in rural Japan selling her first piece to a collector in London, were a powerful affirmation of her vision. But Amara knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay in scaling the platform, in taking it from a niche success to a global force. She was a woman on a mission, and she was not going to stop until she had built an empire from the ashes of her broken heart. As she closed her laptop late one night, the city lights twinkling outside her window, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had been left behind, cast aside, but in doing so, Elias had unwittingly given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to become herself. The launch day for Aura was a study in controlled chaos. For Amara, it felt less like a beginning and more like the end of a long, arduous marathon. She and her small, dedicated team, the brilliant software engineers, Liam and Chloe, and the user experience designer, Marcus, were huddled in her small apartment, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of cold coffee. They had been working around the clock, fueled by caffeine, takeout food, and the sheer, unyielding force of Amara's vision. Now, as the clock on her laptop screen ticked down to the moment they would press Go Live, a collective, Nervous energy filled the room. Amara, a mug of lukewarm coffee clutched in her hands, was a portrait of quiet intensity. She wasn't an explosive, charismatic leader. Her strength was in her calm resolve and her unwavering belief in their work. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Here we go? Let's do this." Liam, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, gave her a nervous grin. "Ready when you are, boss." Amara took a deep breath. Now, with a click, the platform went live. For a few heart-stopping minutes, nothing happened. The silence in the room was deafening, each person holding their breath. Then, a notification pinged on Amara's screen. Then another, and another. The first few artists were signing up. The first few buyers were browse. The system was working. The initial response was positive, but it was nothing compared to the storm that was about to hit. The first wave of users were the small-scale, independent artists and buyers they had targeted with their beta. They loved the clean interface, the transparency of the pricing, and the powerful recommendation engine that felt less like a cold algorithm and more like a helpful art curator. Word began to spread through niche online communities and artist forums. The platform was innovative, efficient, and, most importantly, fair. A few days later, Amara was buried in a sea of data, analyzing user metrics and bug reports, when Chloe let out a sudden, ear-piercing shriek. "Amara, you have to see this." Chloe, tears streaming down her face, pointed to a video on her monitor. It was a live stream from a major art influencer, a woman with millions of followers named Celeste. Celeste was a respected figure in the art world, known for her sharp critiques and impeccable taste. The video was titled, "The Future of Art is Here, My Review of Aura." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. Celeste, in her signature bold style, spent the first 10 minutes of the video talking about the systemic problems in the art world, the gatekeeping, the lack of opportunities for emerging artists, the opaque pricing. Then, she unveiled Aura. She walked her followers through the platform, showcasing its features with an infectious enthusiasm. "This isn't just an app," Celeste declared, her voice filled with a genuine passion. "This is a revolution. It's a platform that takes the power out of the hands of the elite and puts it back where it belongs, with the artists." She showcased an artist who had sold their first piece, a sculptor who had been contacted by a gallery in Paris, all thanks to Aura. The comments section of the live stream was a frenzy of activity, filled with thousands of messages from artists and buyers, all expressing their excitement and disbelief. The video went viral, racking up millions of views in a matter of hours. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The number of sign-ups for Aura skyrocketed, crashing their servers in a beautiful, terrifying cascade of success. Amara and her team spent the next 48 hours working feverishly to handle the influx, their initial anxiety replaced by a high-octane exhilaration. The news of Aura's groundbreaking technology and its explosive growth began to filter out of the art world and into the mainstream tech press. Articles in Wired and TechCrunch praised Amara's vision, calling Aura the great equalizer and a game-changer for the creative economy. Suddenly, Amara was no longer a quiet figure working in the background. She was a rising star, a tech CEO with a groundbreaking product. Investors, sniffing a winner, began to take notice. The phone calls started coming in, first from boutique venture capital firms, then from the giants of the industry. The emails piled up, each one a testament to the fact that they were no longer a small startup. They were a force to be reckoned with. Amara, sitting in her small apartment, fielding calls from titans of industry, felt a surreal calm. The years of hard work, the nights of self-doubt, the pain of Elias's betrayal, it all seemed to lead to this moment. She was no longer just an ambitious woman with a good idea. She was a visionary, and the world was finally ready to see her. The phone in Amara's small apartment had become a constant, insistent companion, a beacon of a future she had only dared to dream of. The flurry of emails from venture capitalists had given way to a relentless stream of calls from titans of the tech world, each one promising a bigger slice of the pie. She had gone from an anonymous founder to the most sought-after name in Silicon Valley almost overnight. The media storm surrounding Aura's viral success had put her on the map, and now, the sharks were circling, all eager for a piece of the revolutionary platform. Amara, however, was no longer the naive woman who had once deferred to Elias's supposed wisdom. The betrayal had sharpened her mind, hardening her against manipulation and self-serving promises. She was a CEO now, and she was learning to play a very different kind of game. Her small team, still working out of her apartment, acted as her inner circle. Liam and Chloe, her two brilliant engineers, analyzed the technical offers, while Marcus, her UX designer, helped her vet the proposals for strategic alignment. They were a tight-knit unit, united by their shared passion and a fierce loyalty to Amara. She scheduled back-to-back meetings, all conducted via video conference from her now iconic, messy but productive home office. She sat across from some of the most powerful people in the tech industry, men and women who had built empires from nothing. But she wasn't intimidated. She was prepared. She had done her research, she knew Aura's value, and she was not going to be lowballed. The offers were staggering. One venture capital firm proposed a massive funding round, valuing Aura at $100 million. Another offered a strategic partnership with a tech giant, promising them access to a global distribution network. Each offer was tempting, a golden ticket to a life of unimaginable wealth and influence. But Amara, with a calm she didn't know she possessed, turned them all down. Her team was baffled. "Amara, why?" Liam had asked one night, his voice a mixture of awe and frustration. "That valuation is insane. We could be set for life." "Because," Amara explained, her eyes fixed on a complex spreadsheet, "they're not buying our vision. They're buying a product they can gut and resell. They see an algorithm, not a community. They want to turn Aura into a commodity, not a movement." Her goal was not just to get rich. It was to build something lasting, something that would fundamentally change the art world for the better. She wanted a partner, not a predator. The calls eventually died down, and a strange silence settled over her apartment. The investors, assuming she was either crazy or too demanding, moved on to other opportunities. Amara, however, was not worried. She knew that the right offer would come, and until then, she would continue to build. And then it did. The call came from a woman named Evelyn Reed, the CEO of Innovate Global, a massive tech conglomerate with a reputation for acquiring revolutionary startups and nurturing them into industry leaders. Evelyn was a legend in the tech world, a brilliant and ruthless businesswoman with a keen eye for innovation. Amara had been warned that Evelyn was a formidable negotiator, but she was also a woman who understood the value of a strong vision. Their first meeting was a tense but exhilarating 3-hour video conference. Evelyn, with her sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, cut straight to the chase. "I'm not interested in a partnership, Ms. Amara," she said, her voice a low, commanding rumble. "I want to acquire your company. I want to make Aura the centerpiece of Innovate Global's new creative division." Amara, a fierce protectiveness rising in her, pushed back. "I'm not selling my vision, Ms. Reed. I'm building a community." Evelyn smiled, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "I know, and that's what I'm buying. I want you to run the division. I want you to have unlimited resources to scale your platform. I want to make you a partner in this, not just an employee." They spent the next week in a whirlwind of negotiations. Amara, with the help of a top-tier corporate lawyer she had hired with her last remaining savings, negotiated every term with a fierce determination. She secured creative control over Aura, a guaranteed budget for her team, and, most importantly, a seat on the board of Innovate Global. She wasn't just selling her company. She was becoming a player in the big leagues. The final deal was signed in a gleaming conference room in Manhattan. The terms were simple and mind-boggling. A complete acquisition of Aura for a sum so large it made headlines around the world. The exact figure was kept private, but industry insiders estimated it to be in the billions. The press release was a bombshell, a story of a young, unknown founder who had built a revolutionary platform from the ground up and sold it to one of the biggest companies in the world. Amara, a 32-year-old black woman from humble beginnings, was now a billionaire CEO, a C-suite executive at one of the world's most powerful tech companies. She had done it not with luck or a powerful network, but with a brilliant idea, unwavering dedication, and a resilience forged in the fires of betrayal. As she walked out of the conference room, her phone buzzing with congratulatory messages, she felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a powerful, beautiful new beginning. Elias's world was a bubble, meticulously crafted and carefully curated. It was a place where his triumphs were celebrated, his tastes were lauded, and his self-importance remained unchallenged. His days were a comfortable routine of gallery openings, long lunches with fellow art enthusiasts, and evenings spent with Serena, who, in her bright, youthful energy, served as a constant affirmation of his recent life choices. He genuinely believed he was happier than he had ever been, having traded what he saw as a stagnant past for a vibrant, exciting future. The news of Amara's success was, therefore, an impossible intrusion. It was a crack in the pristine glass of his reality, a discordant note in the symphony of his perfect life. It first appeared as a small, insignificant detail on a television screen. He and Serena were at a coffee shop, and the news ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, Aura founder, Amara, becomes billion-dollar CEO in record-breaking acquisition. Elias glanced at it, scoffed, and turned his attention back to Serena. "Can you believe these headlines?" he said, a dismissive laugh escaping his lips. "Probably a different Amara. It's a common name." He was so certain he was right. The Amara he knew was the woman who had packed a single box and walked out of his life without a word. She was the one who had supported his dreams, not the one who had created a revolutionary tech empire. That Amara was a figment of a different, more impressive universe. His Amara was a part of his past, a quiet, almost forgettable chapter in his grander narrative. But the headlines didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. His phone, which was usually filled with notifications about art auctions and social events, began to buzz with links from friends and colleagues. "Elias, isn't this your ex-girlfriend? Unbelievable story. Did you know she was working on this?" At first, he ignored them, deleting the messages with a wave of his hand. He even snapped at one of his gallery assistants for bringing it up. "My life is not a tabloid," he'd said, his voice laced with an arrogance that masked a growing unease. The full, undeniable truth came in the form of a full-page article in a prestigious business magazine, a publication he respected and, more to the point, one he desperately wanted to be featured in himself someday. The cover was a stunning, black-and-white photograph of Amara. She was sitting in a high-backed leather chair in a minimalist office, a skyline of skyscrapers visible behind her. Her face, once so familiar to him, was now a mask of serene confidence. The smile she wore was not the shy, self-effacing one he remembered, but a knowing, powerful expression of triumph. The headline was stark: "The billion-dollar betrayal, how a dismissed partner built a tech empire." Elias, sitting alone in his gallery office, read the article with a growing sense of dread. The details were all there. Her name, the company, Aura, which she had founded in secret, the staggering deal with Innovate Global, and most damningly, a small, subtle mention of her humble beginnings and her decade-long partnership with an art gallery owner that had ended abruptly. The implication was clear. He was not mentioned by name, but he was undeniably a footnote in her story, a villain in a narrative where she was the triumphant hero. The realization hit him with a physical force. The woman he had cast aside as not enough was now immeasurably more successful than he could ever have dreamed. He was not a bigger man who had moved on to a brighter future. He was a fool who had thrown away a diamond for a piece of glitter. He looked around his gallery, once a source of immense pride, and saw it for what it was: a small, provincial bubble in a world that had suddenly become vast and terrifyingly competitive. The worst part was that Serena, the symbol of his newfound freedom, was now an unwilling witness to his downfall. She started to ask questions, her initial fascination with the news turning into a series of pointed inquiries. "So, you just left her?" she'd asked one night, her face a mixture of disbelief and genuine curiosity. "And you didn't know she was working on this?" Elias's mumbled excuses sounded hollow even to his own ears. The glow of her youth and carefree spirit, which he had so cherished, now felt like an empty, surface-level distraction. He was no longer the charming, successful gallery owner. He was just another older man who had made a terrible mistake. The gilded frame of his life was beginning to crack. The news of Amara's success was not a fleeting headline. It was a ghost that haunted Elias's meticulously constructed life. It infiltrated his conversations, cast a shadow over his gallery, and, most damagingly, began to poison his relationship with Serena. The golden glow of their romance, which had once felt so vibrant and new, was now fading under the relentless pressure of Amara's triumph. Serena, who had been with him for the lifestyle, the expensive dinners, the exclusive parties, the curated world of art, grew increasingly frustrated with his distracted demeanor. He was no longer the charming, attentive man who had swept her off her feet. His mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying the past, a silent film of his fatal mistake. He found himself scrolling through news articles about Aura late at night, his eyes tracing the trajectory of Amara's rise. He would stare at her confident, smiling face on magazine covers, a silent question forming in his mind. How? How could he have been so blind? The gallery, once a bustling hub of activity, felt stale. Sales were stagnant. The artists he represented, sensing his lack of focus, began to grow restless. The phone calls that once brought him new opportunities now brought him rejections and bad news. He felt like a captain whose ship was slowly sinking, but he couldn't stop staring at the horizon where a magnificent, more powerful vessel, Amara's, sailed on without him. One evening, Serena found him sitting alone in his office, a half-empty glass of scotch on his desk, staring blankly at a tablet. She peered over his shoulder and saw the cover of a major tech magazine. It was Amara, her face radiating power and success. "You're obsessed with her, aren't you?" Serena's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Elias's head snapped up. He felt a flash of guilt, like a child caught doing something wrong. "What? No, of course not. I was just seeing what all the fuss was about." "All the fuss?" Serena scoffed, her tone dripping with disbelief. "She's a billionaire, Elias. Your ex-girlfriend is a billionaire, and you just left her. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? You've been a mess ever since the news broke." He tried to deflect, to lie, but the words caught in his throat. "It's not like that, Serena. It was a long time ago. We just grew apart." "Grew apart," she repeated, her laughter brittle and cold. "You didn't grow apart. You told her she wasn't good enough for you, and then you replaced her with me. Do you think I'm some kind of a consolation prize? A younger, prettier version of the woman you threw away for nothing?" The words stung, hitting a nerve he had been trying to ignore for weeks. He had presented Serena as an upgrade, the trophy on his arm. But now, in the harsh light of Amara's success, she felt less like an upgrade and more like a downgrade, a reminder of his shallow, devastating mistake. The argument that followed was a brutal, honest reckoning. Serena, no longer the carefree model, was a furious, betrayed woman. She accused him of being a coward, a man who couldn't handle a woman with her own ambitions. She told him that his life, his gallery, his entire identity, was a fragile facade built on a foundation of ego and half-truths. Her words, unlike Amara's silent disappointment, were a verbal assault, each one a hammer blow to his crumbling self-worth. "You know what's the worst part?" she said, her voice rising to a crescendo. "You're obsessed with the past. You're a bitter, pathetic man who can't stop thinking about what he lost. You're not the man I thought you were." With that, she turned on her heel, packed a small bag, and left. She didn't slam the door. She simply closed it with a quiet, final click that echoed through the now-empty apartment. Elias was alone again. He looked around the pristine, minimalist space he had once so proudly shared with Serena, and then with Amara, and felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The gilded cage he had so carefully built for his life was not a sanctuary. It was a prison, and he was the only inmate. His downfall wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse. It was a slow, painful unraveling, a quiet decay that had begun the moment he had chosen ambition over love and vanity over substance. Elias's life had become a series of humiliating small failures. His attempts to revive his gallery, the Gilded Frame, were met with indifference. Artists he had once championed were now showing their work at other galleries, their polite rejections a sharp contrast to his former stature. His social invitations dwindled, as if his personal downfall had made him socially radioactive. He was no longer the charming, successful art dealer. He was just Elias, the man who had inexplicably left a future billionaire. Serena's departure had left a void that he had no idea how to fill. He would wander through his now empty apartment, a ghost in his own life, the silence a constant, deafening reminder of his loneliness. He tried to tell himself that it was a temporary setback, that he would eventually get back on his feet. But in the quiet hours of the night, a new, desperate idea took root in his mind. He convinced himself that he just needed to talk to Amara. He believed that if he could just explain, if he could just apologize in person, she would understand. His ego, bruised but not yet broken, whispered to him that their decade-long history couldn't simply be erased. He still believed there was a part of her that missed him, a part that would be swayed by his remorse. He spent days trying to get in touch with her, but she was a fortress. Her old phone number was disconnected. Her social media was a public-facing corporate profile, her personal life a carefully guarded secret. He tried calling her old office, but the receptionist simply told him that Amara was a senior executive now and didn't take personal calls. He was a man desperately trying to get an audience with a queen, but he was just another face in the crowd. In a final, desperate act, Elias decided to go to her. He found the address of the Innovate Global headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper that put his small gallery to shame. He dressed in his most expensive suit, hoping the facade of his former self would somehow grant him entry. But when he arrived, he was just another nameless face among the throngs of people who flowed in and out of the building. The security guard at the front desk was polite but firm. "Do you have an appointment with Ms. Amara?" the guard asked, his eyes never leaving the security monitor. Elias, his stomach churning with nerves, stammered out a weak excuse. He was turned away, a ghost in a place he had no business being. For 3 days, he returned. He waited in the lobby, hoping for a glimpse of her. He was a pathetic, solitary figure, watching the doors, his heart hammering in his chest every time a woman with a similar hairstyle walked by. On the 4th day, as he was about to give up, he was approached by a woman in a crisp business suit. She introduced herself as Amara's executive assistant. "Ms. Amara heard you've been here," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "She said she would see you." For 5 minutes, Elias was led through a labyrinth of glass-walled corridors and state-of-the-art conference rooms. The scale of the place was overwhelming. His gallery, with its curated collection of art, felt like a child's playroom compared to the silent, efficient power of this building. He was ushered into a large, elegant office with a panoramic view of the city. The room was minimalist and tasteful, with a single, stunning piece of contemporary art on the wall, a piece he vaguely recognized from a major international art show, a piece he could never have afforded for his own gallery. Amara sat behind a large, dark wood desk. She was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit that radiated power. Her hair was pulled back in a severe but elegant bun, and her face, once so open and expressive, was now a mask of calm, almost clinical detachment. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She simply looked tired, as if he were an old, tedious problem she had to deal with before moving on to more important things. "Elias," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Please have a seat." He sat in the chair opposite her, a small, trembling man in a large, silent room. The man who had once been so certain of his own power now felt like a desperate supplicant. The man who had once owned her future now sat before her, a ghost of his former self, a beggar at the gates of her empire. Elias sat in the plush leather chair, a small, trembling man in a large, silent room. The panoramic view of the city, once a symbol of his own vague, future ambitions, now felt like a taunt. He looked at Amara, and the woman he saw was a stranger. The Amara he had known was a woman who laughed with her whole body, who wore her heart on her sleeve, and who often looked at him with an adoring, unquestioning trust. This woman was composed, formidable, and entirely self-possessed. Her eyes held no anger, no pain, just a dispassionate calm that was far more unnerving than any fiery outburst could have been. He began to speak, his voice a shaky whisper in the vast office. He spoke of their shared history, the 10 years they had built a life together. He tried to frame his betrayal not as an act of malice, but as a moment of weakness, a foolish mistake he now deeply regretted. He talked about his loneliness, the emptiness he felt after Serena left, and the failure of his gallery. He was desperate, and he was grasping at straws, hoping that their shared past would act as a lifeline. "I was a fool, Amara," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I was blind. I didn't see what was right in front of me." He tried to apologize, but the words felt hollow even to his own ears. He was not apologizing for hurting her. He was apologizing for making a mistake that had cost him his own comfortable life. It was a plea for forgiveness, but it was also, in its own way, a plea for help. He was a drowning man, and he was reaching for the one person who had enough power to save him. Amara listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She simply sat there, a silent, powerful presence, as he poured out his heart, a pathetic litany of self-pity and regret. When he was finished, the silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, a sound that seemed to mock the small, sad drama unfolding in the office. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm and firm, a voice that had learned to command boardrooms and negotiate billion-dollar deals. "Elias," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth he remembered. "You didn't leave me because you were bored. You didn't leave me because you were looking for new experiences. You left me because you couldn't see my potential." The words hit him like a physical blow. They were not a condemnation of his character, but a cold, clinical analysis of his fundamental flaw. "You saw me as a supporting character in your story," she continued, her voice still steady. "You saw me as the comfortable partner, the one who would always be there to support your dreams. You couldn't handle the idea that I had my own. You couldn't see that I was a fire waiting to ignite, because you were so busy making sure your own small flame was the brightest in the room." She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was simply stating a fact, a truth that was more devastating than any hateful word could have been. "Your betrayal," she said, a flicker of something in her eyes, "was not a mistake. It was a choice. And in making that choice, you gave me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to become who I was always meant to be." She stood up from her desk, the movement powerful and deliberate. She walked around the desk, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, and stood in front of him. "I'm not mad at you, Elias," she said, a finality in her voice. "I'm grateful. Your selfishness, your arrogance, your utter lack of faith in me. It forced me to believe in myself." She then walked to the door, a silent gesture that made it clear the meeting was over. He stumbled to his feet, his mind reeling. He had come here for forgiveness, for a chance at redemption, but he had found only a mirror, a reflection of his own ugliness. As she opened the door, a single, final thought pierced through his consciousness. He had never truly loved her. He had loved the idea of her, the comfort she provided, the security she represented. He had loved himself in her presence. The realization was a devastating, sickening blow to his ego. He walked out of the office, a man completely broken, a pathetic supplicant at the gates of the empire he had so foolishly helped create. The building's lobby, once a symbol of his desperate hope, now felt like a tomb. As he stumbled out, a sharp, debilitating pain shot through his chest, a final, fitting punctuation mark to the end of his old life. He collapsed, a man undone by his own ambition and a love he had failed to see. Elias's collapse in the lobby of Innovate Global was a final, fitting punctuation mark on the end of his old life. He was rushed to the hospital, a sobering wake-up call that forced him to confront the truth of his existence. He wasn't the invincible, charming art dealer he had always believed himself to be. He was just a man, vulnerable and fragile, both physically and emotionally. The doctors diagnosed his collapse as a stress-induced cardiac event, a direct result of his chronic anxiety, regret, and the final, crushing blow of his meeting with Amara. His recovery was a slow, painful process, both for his heart and his ego. Confined to a hospital bed, with only the sterile white walls for company, he had no choice but to confront the choices that had led him there. He realized that the life he had built was a house of cards, a fragile facade that had come tumbling down the moment his primary source of validation, his perceived superiority over Amara, had been taken away. He was not a villain. He was not a hero. He was just a deeply flawed man who had mistaken ambition for love and vanity for success. Amara, meanwhile, moved on to bigger and better things. She had heard about Elias's collapse, but felt no sense of triumph or satisfaction. She felt a quiet, almost sad sense of closure. The man who had once shattered her world had, in his own way, been the catalyst for her to build a new one. He was a ghost of her past, a distant memory of a life she had long since outgrown. Her new life was a whirlwind of success and fulfillment. Aura was a resounding success under the banner of Innovate Global. It was celebrated globally as a platform that truly democratized the art world, and Amara was hailed as a visionary. She traveled the world, speaking at conferences, meeting with artists, and seeing her dream come to life in a way she could never have imagined. But the most significant change in her life wasn't professional, it was personal. She found true love in a kind and brilliant software engineer named David. He was a man who worked in a different division at Innovate Global, and they met at a corporate retreat. David was the antithesis of Elias. He was quiet, but confident. He was a champion of her success, not a man who felt threatened by it. He didn't see her as a trophy or a supporting character. He saw her as an equal, a partner in every sense of the word. Their relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering support. They would spend their weekends not at glitzy art openings, but at local cafes, debating the future of technology and social justice. David celebrated her triumphs with a genuine joy that was infectious, and he was her rock during the moments of stress and doubt that came with running a massive company. He was a man who understood the value of her work and her heart, and he loved her for both. They built a life together, one based on a quiet, profound happiness. They married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by their family and a close circle of friends. Their home was not a minimalist showpiece, but a warm, comfortable space filled with books, art from Aura's emerging artists, and the laughter of friends and family. Years later, Amara and David, surrounded by their family and a thriving business, would occasionally see Elias's name pop up in a news article. He had finally found some measure of peace, running a small, less ambitious gallery that focused on local artists and community outreach. He had stopped trying to prove himself to the world and had instead found a quiet, humble purpose. Amara had no ill will toward him. In fact, she often thought of him with a quiet sense of gratitude. The man who had once shattered her world had, in his own way, been the catalyst for her to build a new one, a world where she was not only successful but truly, deeply happy. Her story was not one of revenge, but of resilience. It was a story about a woman who had been rejected and had, in the face of that betrayal, chosen to become the most authentic and powerful version of herself. It was a happy ending, not because she had gotten revenge, but because she had found a life far more meaningful and fulfilling than the one she had lost.